Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome to the shir about the halachos of the Seder. I think we're going to do the second part, which is insights into the Haggadah. Leave it as a separate shir because it's really too much to cram into one shir. During the night of the Seder, we fulfill several mitzvos, two Torah mitzvos, which is the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, the mitzvah to recount the story of the Exodus from Egypt, and the mitzvah to eat matzah. Okay, and we do several rabbinic mitzvahs as well, which is the mitzvah of the 4 cups of wine, the mitzvah, rabbinic mitzvah of eating maror. Maror nowadays is only rabbinic because we don't have the carbon pesach, and also the mitzvah of reclining as we eat the various foods as well. So those are the basic rabbinic mitzvahs that we do during the course of the evening. The first Torah mitzvah that I mentioned is called Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, recounting in detail the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And the question is, what's the difference between Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, the mitzvah of mentioning the Exodus from Egypt, which we have all year round, both in the morning and at night, as we mentioned in the Mishnah that we quote in the Haggadah, Hayamim and Haleilos, Man Tiskros Yom Tzeis Chomeretz Mitzrayim, to mention, and we fulfill that by the last verse in the Shema, Ani Hashem Elokecha Asher Tzeis Chomeretz Mitzrayim. We should have in mind when you do it on a daily basis. I'm fulfilling the Torah mitzvah of mentioning, of Zechira, of mentioning God, the fact that God took us out from Egypt. And also when you do the Shema at night, you should have that in mind that I'm doing the nighttime mentioning. So the night of the Seder is a night like any other night. We have the mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, mentioning the Exodus from Egypt. What is this additional mitzvah that we have one night a year on the night of the Seder of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim? And the answer is, of course, alluded to in the very terminology. Zechira means to mention. A mere perfunctory mention suffices to fill that mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, the all year round mitzvah. The night of the Seder is Sipur, is L'saper, to tell a Sipur, to tell a story, to go on at length about the details of the Exodus. That's the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. They always point out also that the mitzvah of Zechira, it's enough to just make a declaration, a sentence or two. And Sipur ideally should be Derech She'elo Tshuva, question and answer. That should be the format of Sipur. So that's another difference between Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Torah mitzvah of Sipur, which is Dafka on the night of the 15th, the night of the Seder, and the Torah mitzvah of Zechira, which is all year round, twice a day, the way we pass it like Ben Zoma and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in the Mishnah that we quote in the Haggadah. So that's the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. The mitzvah of Matzah is actually the one Torah mitzvah of eating that we have all year round. We do a lot of eating in Judaism. We have Shabbos meals, etc. But the one absolute Torah mitzvah that we have with eating all year round is to eat a kazayis matzah on the night of an olive's worth, at least we really eat more, on the night of the Seder. Now, when the Beis Hamikdash was around, we had an additional Torah mitzvah of eating carbon pesach, right? Eating the Paschal sacrifice, and then also maror became daraisa because maror is supposed to be eaten in conjunction, the bitter herbs in conjunction with the carbon pesach. So then you had other additional Torah mitzvahs of eating. But nowadays, we don't have a temple, we don't have a carbon pesach. Only the matzah is the rice because there's a matzah, a mitzvah, a pasuk mentions a mitzvah matzah independent of carbon pesach. It says b'erev tochel matzos, as opposed to maror is mentioned only in conjunction with the carbon pesach al matzos u'marom yochlu, and therefore if you don't have a carbon pesach, maror nowadays is not on a Torah level. It's all rabbinic to remember the maror that we had when we had the carbon pesach. So that's a mitzvah of maror. Okay, and then we also said we have the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. Now, we have 4 cups of wine. What's the symbolism there? So number one, the symbolism of having the cup of wine is we're drinking a toast to God and saying a l'chaim, a thank you, a toast to our freedom. That's the idea of having these cups of wine. Why 4? Many reasons given, but perhaps the most famous is it corresponds to the 4 terms of redemption that God used at the beginning of Parshas Va'era. God says, I'll take you out, I'll redeem you, I will save you, I'll redeem you, I'll take you as a nation. And then there's also a 5th term, Vehevesi, I'll bring you to the land. Okay, that's actually why we have the 5th cup. We call it the cup of Eliyahu. We don't have it nowadays, we're in exile, but there's a 5th term of redemption, which we hope God will bring us to the land, redeem us with the coming of Mashiach, and then makes sense to have a 5th cup, really, connected, corresponding to the term of Vevesi, that God brought us to the land. Okay, so that's the symbolism of the 4 cups. Now the question is, in terms of the 4 cups, how big do the cups have to be? How much do you have to drink? Can you use grape juice? All these are famous, common questions. So let's take it one step at a time. In terms of the size of the cup, so the cup should hold what's called a revius. Revius halog. Revius word means a quarter of a log, a volume measure of a log. We call it a log. Revius is machlokas aposkim. Some say it's as small as 3 ounces. Some say it's as big as 5 ounces. So certainly, if you have 5 ounces, it's 5.03 ounces, the biggest amount. So certainly, if you have a 6 ounce cup, you're definitely covered. A 6 ounce cup is not so big. I recommend you have smaller cups because as I'm gonna explain, really the ideal is to drink the entire cup. Unlike regular kiddush and Havdalah and other places where you drink benching, where you drink from a cup of wine all year round, you only have to have what's called malo lugmav, a cheekful, which is the majority of a revius, the poskim say. For an average person, a cheekful is the majority of a revius. So if a revius is 2 ounces, I'm saying for revius is, let's say, the smallest share, 3 ounces. So 2 ounces is all you need. If it's 5 ounces, 3 ounces, okay, is all you have to drink. But you don't have to drink so much. But when it comes to Seder night, the poskim say that really, in addition to, let's say, the first cup, which is Kiddush, and it's also the first of the 4 cups. So in terms of Kiddush, you only have to drink a Malo Lugma, but it's also one of the Dalit Kosos. Dalit Kosos, the mitzvah is to drink the whole kos, to drink the entirety of the cup, or at least we say the majority of the cup, because we have a principle in halacha, the rubo kukulo, the majority of the cup is like the entirety of the cup. Okay, so really, you don't want your cups to be too big, because you're going to get drunk and fall asleep. You're not going to make it through the Seder. So as long as your cup is 5 ounces or 6 ounces, certainly you're good to go. And then you drink the whole, all of that, ideally, or at least the majority of that. That's really the proper way to go. Now, what type of, can you use wine, grape juice, or certainly wine is good, but what about grape juice? So grape juice is always the age-old question. And the truth is, there's a dispute between Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and Rabbi Soloveitchik. Rabbi Soloveitchik felt that grape juice is okay if you prefer it, because the Rambam says it should be a shtia areva, a pleasant drink. So if you like, or you don't like the alcohol or the effects of the alcohol, you prefer grape juice. So he says that's actually preferable. Moshe Weinstein said, no, ideally, it should have some alcoholic content, as opposed to all year round. Moshe says, by Kiddush Abdullah, Moshe was makel by grape juice. He was lenient. He said grape juice is by Priagofen, it counts. But when he says it comes to the Seder, you're drinking Dalad Kosos, it should be a L'chaim, it's Derech Cherus, the way of free men drinking a toast that should have some alcoholic content, ideally. So what you could do to be Yotze, all the Shitas, certainly, you can make even a combination of wine and grape juice. Or you could have also, I recommend not having wine with such a high alcohol content. It doesn't have to be 12, 14%. It could be 5% in the light wines, just to make it easier so you'll last. In other words, if you're a tough guy and you could have, then gives them to hate, not, do what you want. But certainly if you do 51% wine, 49% grape juice, I think you've covered all your bases, and that's certainly good enough. And especially if you don't have such a big cup, it should not be such a big deal to drink the majority of that, or even preferably all of that, for each of the 4 cups. Okay, so that's the story with the Daled Kosa. So now we're ready to start the Seder. We should start after nightfall, because even though all year round we can make Kiddush before Tzeisak Chavim, but during the Seder, all the mitzvahs of the night, the Kiddush is the first of the 4 cups, so that's one of the special mitzvahs of the night, should be done when it's certain night. And certain night is after stars out, Vadai Laila, because all the mitzvahs of the night are connected and tied to Karban Pesach. And it says by Karban Pesach, Va'achlu es al-basar ba'layla hazeh. You should eat the Karban Pesach on this night, during the nighttime. Okay? So, including everything is connected to that, and certain night is what? After stars out. And just to give a little bit of a halachic overview, before stars out, it's what's called Ben Hashmashos, twilight. Right? You have sunset, Shkia Sachama, the setting of the sun. Right, till sunset is certain day. The sun sets, begins the period of what's called Ben Hashmashos, twilight, which is an interim period. It's doubtful whether it's day or night. It's a little of both. And that extends till stars out, which stars out is the end of twilight and the beginning of a certain night. So we want to do all our mitzvahs, ideally, even Kiddush, from after stars out on the Seder night, because it's all connected and tied to and compared to Karban Pesach, where the Torah says explicitly it has to be by Laila and night. So we start the Kiddush after nightfall. You should have all your most beautiful dishes and silverware and china on the table, as opposed to all year round, you're supposed to leave something back, Zecher l'churban. But tonight we go all out, because to commemorate our freedom and our redemption, everything, your most beautiful finery should be out on the table for the Seder. The custom is the men wear kitlach, white robes, different reasons given for that. Either it's because we're going to get too haughty because we have all our finery out, and the white robes evokes the white burial shrouds that we're buried in. So remember not to get too haughty. That's kind of And the other reason is the opposite, is actually, the Vilna Gaon explains, back in the day, it's commemorative of the celebration. That back in the day, they used to wear a chaluk lavan, a white garment, a special white garment when they ate the karbanos, so they ate the karban pesach, a special celebratory garment. So it's really two ends of the spectrum, but certainly the custom is for the men, at least the heads of the household, to wear kittel at the Seder. So we start the Seder, Kadesh, make Kiddush. Everyone should have their own cup. Now, women are equivalent to men on this night, even though these are time-bound positive commandments. But even when it comes to the Doraisa mitzvahs, now the general rule is time-bound positive commandments women are exempt from. But tonight, women are equally obligated. Why so? In terms of the matzah, on a Torah level, the Torah says we make a connection between matzah and chametz. It's the same ingredients, just a different amount of time. So whoever is prohibited to have chametz, which is certainly women are obligated in all the don'ts, the lo says, the prohibitions of the Torah, they're obligated in the do's as well, namely the do of eat matzah. Since they're forbidden to eat chametz, they're yes obligated to eat matzah, even though it's a time-bound positive commandment. And so too all the rabbinic mitzvahs of the night, like Daled Kosos. The Talmud says that because Afhein Hayu Ba'oso Anes, because they were part of the miracle, they were part of the persecution, they're part of the redemption, and they even played a key role in the redemption. So therefore, they are equally obligated in the mitzvah of Daled Kosos and all the other mitzvahs as well. So women are equally, and also the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is tied to Karban Pesach. So they also have to say the story. And by the way, if people don't understand Hebrew, then they should say the Haggadah in English. It's perfectly, your Yotze with that, perfectly fine. It's actually preferable because you should understand it. If you say it in Hebrew, you don't understand it, you're not really fully Yotze, you're not really Yotze the mitzvah. You should say it preferably in English if you don't understand the Hebrew. Okay? So women are equally obligated in all the mitzvahs of the night. So everyone should have their own cup of wine for Kiddush. And after Kiddush, actually the end of Kiddush, you say Shechianu. The women who usually say Shechianu by Hadlakas Neiros should not say the Shechianu again on the Kiddush. That's a bracha l'vatala, because you already said, thank God for bringing us to this time, the new Yantif, you already said that, there's no need to say it again. Okay, the men who haven't said it yet, they say the Shechianu, then they recline. Okay, what's the proper way to recline? Rabbi Soloveitchik always points out that people should not just tend to, number one, you lean to the left just so it doesn't go down the wrong side, doesn't go down your windpipe. But it's not enough just to lean to the left in the air with no support. That's not Haseba. Haseba is leaning against something. Like back in the day, the free people, I'm sure we've seen the pictures of the Romans on the couches eating the clusters of grapes with the little tables next to them. That's what Haseba means. And back in the day, rich, wealthy, free people ate that way. That's why we do it tonight, celebrating our freedom. But it means you're supported by something. You're leaning against something. So if you just lean in the air, that's not really a seba. So what Soloveitchik suggested is you flip around the back of your chair, take the back support, flip it around to your side, and you want to put a pillow also. Then you'll have something to support you as you're leaning. That's really the proper way to do Heseba. Okay. Then Kadesh, and now Orchatz. We wash our hands like we do for bread, but without a blessing. What's the story with that? So the halacha is that the Gemara says if one eats davar shetibul b'mashka, something dipped in liquid or something washed in liquid is still wet, a fruit, a vegetable, something like that, which is wet, which we're about to do with karpas, right? Actually, speaking of which, I didn't have to mention the Seder plate as well, which the karpas is part of. The basic custom in terms of the Seder plate, which should also be on the table, is three. It's in the shape is the Arizal's custom, which is two segels, one on top of the other, meaning three and then three. What's the three and then three? So it's the top right, the upper right dot of the segel, if you will, is the zroa, is the shenkbo, some type of roasted piece of meat on a bone, commemorative of the Karban Pesach, which was roasted, eaten back in the day. Top left is beitza, the egg, which is commemorative of the Karban Chagiga, which is the holiday sacrifice, which they offered at every holiday. And actually, the main bulk of the meal was from that sacrifice. They would actually eat just a few bites of the Karban Pesach at the end, but the main meal was the Karban Chagiga. And why an egg? Actually, a roasted egg, because the egg is a sign of mourning. We're mourning the fact we don't have the temple and the sacrifices anymore. Why is an egg a sign of mourning? Because it's round, the cycle of life and death. So that's the top left is the beitza. The bottom of the top segel, again, a segel is like three dots, two up here, one down here. So the bottom dot of the top segel is the maror. Okay, some people use chrein, the horseradish for that. Okay, Then the top right of the bottom segel is the charoses, the mortar-like mixture. It's supposed to remember the mortar that we work with, the bricks, the slavery. It's a combination of some people apples, some people citrus fruit, with red wine commemorating the blood, and some cinnamon and nuts people put in it, which we're going to dip the maror into that charoses to take away the extreme sharpness of the maror. Then bottom left, the top left of the bottom segel is the karpas, which we're talking about now. It's a vegetable, some kind of vegetable dipped in, going to dip in salt water. And then the absolute bottom of the bottom segel is the chazeres, which literally means is a type of maror, which means lettuce is actually the best type of maror mentioned first in the Mishnah in regards to what type of vegetable to eat for maror, and that's at the absolute bottom. So that's the custom that Arizal, two segels. So top right zroa, top left beitza, below that maror, and then again to the right charoses, to the left karpas, and the absolute bottom is chazaris. Anyway, so that's we're up to, we're eating karpas, okay? So we're about to eat karpas. We're washing our hands without the blessing for karpas. And the question is, why do we have to do that? The Gemara says that for technical purity, two mantara reasons, which I'm not going to go into now, not only do we wash for bread, which we maintain that custom nowadays, but even the Gemara says you're supposed to wash, if anything, any wet food, vegetable or fruit, which is still wet, you want to eat that, you have to wash wash your hands as well. Okay. Now, why don't we do that nowadays, like we do for the bread? So some authorities say actually you should do it nowadays, and they even make a blessing. They do it, and they make a blessing on it year round. I believe the Rambam and the Vilna Gaon and the Taz said that's what should be done all year round. And they actually at the Seder they wash with a bracha. But the prevalent custom is year round we don't do it. Why not? Because many authorities say that that level of stringency we don't have to do nowadays because we're not careful about ritual purity and impurity. We're all ritually impure anyways. We've all gone to funerals. We're not going into the temple. We're not eating sacrifices. We're not eating truma. So therefore, that level for the fruits, the wet fruits, we don't have to do. We don't do nowadays. So then, if that's true, why are we doing it Seder night? So the Nitziv and others explain because we do a lot of things differently on the Seder night to get the kids to ask, why is tonight different? Okay, which of course we'll answer them with, tonight is different. Let me tell you a story about that Exodus from Egypt. And also we do things which are commemorative of what happened back in the day when we had a Carbon Pesach where we did wash for wet fruit. Okay, so that's why we wash, but we don't make the blessing because since we're not technically obligated, according to many authorities, it would be a brachal batala if we actually made the blessing. So we wash to commemorate and to less illicit questions and to commemorate what was back in the day, but we don't make the blessing. That's urchatz. Now, karpas, eating the karpas itself. Why do we eat the karpas? The karpas is a type of vegetable. It's either celery or parsley, some kind of green vegetable. And the basic reason for eating the karpas is simply that kids should ask. Kadesha Yishalo Atinokos. That's the implication of Rashi and other commentaries on the Gemara. In other words, why are we having salad? We didn't wash for bread yet. Usually we wash for bread, begin the meal, wash for bread, and then we have the salad. Then we have the vegetables. Why are we having the vegetables at this point? So that elicits questioning in the children. Why is tonight different? Why are we doing things differently? Which of course we'll answer with Magid, with the Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. Why this particular type of vegetable? So they say if you jumble the letters of karpas, you come with samach, which is 60, perech, which means hard work. That's 60, 10,000, means 600,000 Jews, 60 times 10,000, that's what's called shishim ribo. Ribo is 10,000, 60, 10,000s, which equals 600,000 Jews, really men above 20, but more than that, men and women, actually women and children. Perech did hard work in Egypt. So that's why we take dafka karpas, which is again some kind of green vegetable. Some have the custom to do potatoes. The bottom line is it should be some kind of hadama. Okay, you dip it in salt water. Why salt water? Because that's evocative of the tears that the Jews shed when they were in Egypt. Okay, and why dipping altogether? Because that's the way they ate a lot of their foods back in the day was with dipping in different things. So you should make the hadama. You should have in mind when you have this hadama, you should have in mind the maror, which you're going to have later, the romaine lettuce and the horseradish. Okay, and you should eat less than a kazayas. Why less than a kazayas? Less than an olive's worth? Because if you eat a kazayas, you're going to have to make an after blessing. If you have to make the after blessing, that's going to cut off your bar priyadama from working for the maror that you have later on. And why do we have to have a hadama now for the Mara we're having later on? Just make the Hadama later on when you have the Mara. The answer is because it's a question whether or not you should make Hadama on the Mara. Because on the one hand, the Mara comes after you've washed and made Hamotzi. Usually you don't make a separate blessing after having eaten the Hamotzi. But on the other hand, Mara is not really part of the regular meal. So Mara, whether or not you make Hadama on it is a question. So we take ourselves out of a state of doubt, make the Hadamba on the Karpas, have in mind the Mara which is going to come later, and make sure you have a small enough piece that you're not going to have to make an after blessing, which would separate the Hadamba that you're making now from the Mara later on. Okay, and many people do not recline when they have the karpas. So we did Kaddish, Orchatz, Karpas. Now we're up to Yachatz. We're going to break the middle matzah. Most people have the three matzahs. The men should have the three matzahs in front of them during the Seder. We break the middle matzah. Why do we break the middle matzah at this point? Yachatz. Why so? So the answer is because the Torah calls matzah lechem oni. Lechem oni. So there's multiple interpretations to what does that mean, lechem oni. Oni bread. So the word oni could be related to the word la'anot, to respond or to recite. The Talmud says it's lechem sha'onim alav dvarim harbe, bread over which many things are recited, namely the story of the Exodus from Egypt. So the bread, the matzah, the lechem oni, is supposed to be on the table when you recite magid. But oni also could be read as lechem oni, poor man's bread. What does it mean, poor man's bread? The Talmud says that darko shal ani b'prusa. The way of a poor man is to have a prusa, a piece, not a whole loaf. Right? He gets a piece of someone else's loaf. He can't afford a whole loaf himself. The Navi says the pasuk, "Fros laroiv lachmecha." Break off a piece of your own bread and give it to the poor. So the poor gets a piece of the rich man's bread. So therefore, we fulfill both interpretations of the verse. We have the matzah bread in front of us. We're about to recite magid, but that's lechem sha'onim alav dvarim harbe, lechem oni, lechem sha'onim alav dvarim harbe, bread over which we recite the story of the Exodus from Egypt. But that bread over which we're about to recite the story of the Exodus in magid should also be lechem oni. It should be poor man's bread. It should be a piece, a prusa, a broken piece. So before we recite the magid, we break the matzah in half, that we should recite the magid over a broken piece of matzah. That's why we do the yachatz at this point. We take the bigger piece, or the bigger half, or it doesn't have to be exactly bigger, take the other half and you put it away, wrap it up. The custom is to put it away for afikomen later, and the children, the custom is for the children to steal the afikomen and to hold a ransom for some prize. That's based on the fact, in part, that the night of the Seder was the night where Yaakov, quote, stole the brachos from Yitzchak. It's a night of blessings. That's the two types of kid goat that he asked to cook. He brought him two gdei izim. One, they say, Zech l'karban Pesach, one Zech l'chagiga. So that's part of the idea of the stealing the afikomen. It's the night when Yaakov Avinu stole the, quote unquote, stole the brachos. Anyway, so that's Yachatz. And that takes us up. So we did Kapras Yachatz, now Magid. Now we're about to start the recitation of the Haggadah to do the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. And we start off Magid with actually a paragraph in Aramaic. We say this is the bread of affliction that our forefathers ate in Egypt. All that need, come and eat. All that need to celebrate Pesach, come and celebrate Pesach. Now we are here, next year in Israel. Now we are slaves, next year we are free. Why do we say this paragraph at the beginning of Magid? Why is it in Aramaic and not in Hebrew like the rest of the Haggadah? So I think the idea is that we're acknowledging at the very outset, even though we're celebrating our redemption from Egypt, we're acknowledging the fact that we're still in exile, actually. So obviously God took us out of Egypt and made us his nation, gave us the Torah, and that part of it is irrevocable. That part of the redemption from Egypt is irrevocable. But in a certain way, we're actually still back in exile, and we're acknowledging at the very outset of our Magid, of our telling the story of the redemption from exile, that in a certain sense we're unfortunately back in exile, and we're praying to God that he should take us out of this exile, bring us back to Jerusalem, and the temple where we'll be able to properly and fully celebrate the Karban Pesach, the holiday of Pesach with the Karban Pesach and all the full accoutrements and doing the Pesach in the proper way. So we start off acknowledging that from the very get-go. And then when we say halach ma'anya, we say this is the bread of affliction. We're supposed to point to it and uncover it and show it. This is the bread of affliction that our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. So again, pointing to the fact that also as we're starting Magid, we're doing it with the prop of the broken, the poor man's bread in front of us. Now at this point, the um, matzos are covered, and we pour the second cup of wine. And here the son asks the four questions. Okay, uh, like we said, the mitzvah of Sibur Yitzias Mitzrayim is supposed to be a question and answer format, and the child is supposed to ask the question. The father answers with a story. Why is tonight? The question is, why is tonight different? The child asks. Father says, "I'll tell you why tonight's different," and he tells him the story of the Exodus. The four questions are the order in listen to Suchashka is first matzah, which is the main mitzvah, Torah mitzvah we have of the night, and then maror, which is we eat right after the matzah, the rabbinic mitzvah, and then we dip twice. We say, why do we dip twice? Usually we don't even dip once. What are the two dippings? Once the karpas in the salt water, the second dipping the mar in the charoses, and then the last question, at least nowadays, is why do we recline all year round? We don't necessarily recline. In the times where they had the temple, the first question was about why we're eating the Karm Pesach, why are we having this roasted meat? We don't necessarily have that all year round, and the question about reclining was not part of the four questions. So the child asked the four questions, and now the father answers with a story of the Exodus from Egypt. Avadim hayinu lefaru mitzrayim. We were slaves in Egypt, and the question is actually not the question, but actually some have the custom that they actually repeat the Manishtana to themselves after the kid asks it. Some don't. Some just leave it. The kid asks it. Now we're going to tell the story. The rabbis actually tell us that the basic outline of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim should be what's called Maschil Begnus or Messiah B'Shavach. You start off with the difficult parts of the story, the Gnus, and we end off with a happy ending with the positive parts. That's really the basic plot line of any story. That, you start off with the difficult beginnings and end off with a hopefully happy ending. So that's the way Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim should be as well. And there's a debate in the Gemara: is how are you maskal b'gnus? Do you start off with the gnus, the difficulty of the physical part, the physical slavery, and then God took us out of the physical slavery? That's the happy ending. Or do you talk about the difficult spiritual start, that B'tchila of the Avodah Zarah Hayav saying that to begin with we were idol worshippers. Avram Avinu, before he found God, was from a family of idol worshippers. He himself worshipped idols early on before he came to realize there's only one God in the world and that idolatry is false. So we started off on a low spiritual state, and the happy ending is that God made us his people. He took us out of Egypt, brought us to Har Sinai, gave us the Torah, made us spiritually enlightened, made us his people. So which one is it? So the Talmud says we say both. We start out, we talk about on the physical side, the tough beginnings, and also on the spiritual side, the tough beginnings. And then we talk about the physical redemption from our physical tough beginnings, and we also talk about redemption from our spiritual tough beginnings as well. So the Avadim Hayinu is the physical tough beginnings. We were slaves in Egypt. And then we say, even if we're all wise people, right? Afilu Kolanu Chachamim, it's a mitzvah to tell over the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim, and whoever does so more, it's Meshubach. And the question is why? We heard the story a million times already. Why do we have to say it over again? If we're scholars, we know the story. Why do even scholars have to say it over? And the answer is, and I'll answer in traditional Jewish fashion, I'll answer the question with another question. Now, there's a basic question later in the Haggadah, really the main body of the Haggadah. We look to the verses of Arami Ovid Avi, which is where? In the book of Devarim, in Parshas Kisavo. It's the section that the Jewish farmer, when he's bringing his bikurim, he recites, and he's basically thanks God for Jewish history, taking us out of Egypt, bringing us to the land, giving him the fruits, and now bringing the fruits, thank you, God. And the question is, why do we go to those verses? We don't recite the end part about the land and the fruits, but the part of the going down to Egypt, being enslaved in Egypt, and God redeeming us from Egypt, that beginning part of what the farmer says, forms the main part of the Haggadah. So the question is, why do we go there to the book of Dvarim to get the verses? Why don't we just read the verses directly in the book of Shmos, the book of Exodus, where the story originally happened? And so Rabbi Soloveitchik explains that the reason why we do that is because the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is not just a dry retelling of the events. It's not a history lesson. We know the story already. The reason why we have the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is what? It's an act of Hakaras Hatov. It's an act of thanksgiving to God Almighty for what He did for us. That's why we end off the whole Magid. After we say this story, we say, Lefichach anachnu chayovim lahodos lahalel l'shabeach Right? You have to praise God because He did this. Therefore, we break out in Hallel at the end of Magid. We say the Thanksgiving prayer. So the whole point of this exercise, it's an act. It's not just a dry history lesson. It's an act of Hakar Satov. It's an act of saying thank you to God Almighty for what He did for us. And that's why we choose, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, specifically the section of Arami Ovid Avi, because that's what the farmer is doing. The farmer is doing is not telling the Kohen who he's giving the fruits to a history lesson. The Kohen knows Jewish history. He's reciting it as a way of saying thank you, God, for what you've done for us, me as an individual and us collectively as a nation. Look what you've done. You've taken us out of a low place, low beginnings, humble beginnings in exile, slavery in Egypt, and you've raised us up to where we are now. And that is what the farmer is doing, and that's what we're doing on the night of the Seder as well, when we're telling over the story of the Exodus. And that's why, even if we are scholars, we know the story, we still have to go through it, to go through the exercise of saying it over, because this act of retelling is a way of saying thank you to God for what you have done to us. And that even the scholar has to do. And that's why also, Kol Amar B'Lesaper, Harei Ze Meshubach. The more you do it, the bigger the mitzvah, the bigger the thank you. The more you retell the story, recall the story, the details, the greater the thank you. Okay, so that is the beginning of the Haggadah. As we said, we'll probably have a second installment where we go more in depth. Okay, we recite the story. As I said, now we get to the end of Magid, where we recite the first two paragraphs of the Hallel. Okay. Now, why at the end of Magid do we recite Hallel? So I mentioned the reason before, because that's the culmination of the story. Is we're telling it to say thank you. So we break out in a song of thanksgiving to God Almighty. Why don't we say the whole Hallel at this point? Why do we split off the first two paragraphs, then eat the meal, and then resume the rest of Hallel after benching? So the answer on a basic halachic level is because we are framing the meal in terms of making the meal a Sudas Hadah by bookending the meal with the beginning of Hallel and then having the rest of Hallel after the meal. You're essentially turning the meal into just, instead of just a regular Yontif meal, into what's called a Sudas Hadah, a meal of thanksgiving to God. The meal is also a form of saying thank you to God. We have what's called a Sudas Hadah, a meal of thanksgiving to God. Why specifically the two paragraphs at the beginning? Because those two paragraphs focus on Yitzias Mitzrayim specifically, B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim. And so that's what the first half of the Seder is devoted to, thanking God for the previous redemption, the past redemption from Egypt. The end of the Seder and the rest of Hallel is devoted towards the future redemption and anticipation and pleading with God for the future redemption, and that's the rest of Hallel, the theme of the rest of the Hallel. That's why it's later in the Seder. Okay, so now we say the first two paragraphs of Hallel at the end of Magid. We make the Asher Ga'alanu blessing, and then Ashkenazim make a second Bar Piragafim. Sfardim say the Bar Piragafim from Kiddush carries over. Ashkenazim say each cup is a mitzvah on its own, therefore deserving of its own Bar Piragafim, each one according to its custom. Drink the second cup reclining, okay? And now we're up to Rach, so we're washing our hands for bread in the normal fashion. And then Motzi Matzah. Motzi, now we're supposed to have, what do we have here? We have 2.5 matzahs, right? Because we broke the middle matzah yachatz. You hold all 2.5 matzahs for Motzi. You make Motzi Lechem and Aretz. Drop the bottom matzah. Make the bracha Asher Kishon Sanu Al Achilas Matzah. Have a kazayas from both the broken piece and the whole piece. How much is a kazayas of a hand matzah? Approximately, call it around a third of a hand matzah, and again, probably maybe the majority of a square machine shmur matzah. Again, even if you're having machine, has to be for the seder to be shmur matzah, not just regular strites matzah. To be also the mitzvah of matzah. If that's all you have, it's probably better than nothing to eat the regular because it's least shmura. Watch from becoming chametz from a certain point, but really we want shmura mishas tzira from the time of harvest, and also it should be made lishma l'shem matzahs mitzvah, for the sake that people make it, should make it for the sake of the mitzvah. Okay, so one kazayis of motzi, one kazayis from matzah, one kazayis from the big piece, from the whole piece, one kazayis from the broken piece. And again, women have to have matzah as well, and that's motzi and then matzah. Then maror, we have maror, which we use the romaine lettuce. Some people put a little bit of the horseradish in. You should have a kazayas of the maror. How much is a kazayas of maror? Again, a good sized leaf. They say volume-wise, it's about the volume of a golf ball. So figure that you have a decent-sized leaf, you crumple it up, you dip it in the charoses to take away a little bit of the extreme bitterness, and then you make the alachilas, the bracha alachilas maror, and eating it not reclining. Okay, then without, you shouldn't really talk from the hamotzi through this part unless it's something to do with past the maror or past the matzah. You shouldn't talk about other things at this point because you want the motzi to carry over to the korech, which you're about to do. What's the rationale behind the korech? We have this maror sandwich because Hillel, as we say in the declaration before, we eat korech, was of the opinion that all the various foods should be eaten together as like a lafas, as a sandwich. Okay, not just have matzah separate and carbon pesach separate and maror separate, but he used to korcham biyachad, eat it all together. He said that's the way to do it. So to remember and to honor his opinion, we don't have carbon pesach, but we eat the matzah and maror as a sandwich. You should have one kazayas of matzah broken in half, and then another kazayas of maror. You dip it again in the charosas, and then eat that maror sandwich reclining. That's korech. Some people make the declaration about Hillel beforehand. Some people say dafka after you eat the sandwich, not to be mafsik, not to interrupt between the motzi and the eating of the sandwich. Okay, so that's korech. And now we're up to Shulchan Aruch. We have a nice yontif meal, and then at the end of the yontif meal, we have tzafun, we have the afikomen. What's that about? Another kazayas, some say two kazayas of matzah. And now, if you can't find it, your child does not want to give up the matzah he stole, you could technically have another piece. It doesn't have to be specifically that piece. What's the idea behind afikomen? Most commentaries say it's zeichel Pesach, that the Pesach, as we said, was eaten at the end of the meal. Al hasova, once you're satiated, you shouldn't be fully stuffed. Not also with afikomen. If you eat, you can't fit any more in. You're just stuffing in your mouth that you're not yotze. Yeah, you should make sure to leave a little room, as hard as that is with all the matzah and the whole meal you just eat. Just pace yourself not to overly stuff. You have a little room for the afikomen. Okay, and the carbon Pesach was eaten at the end because the chagiga, the carbon chagiga, was the main meat of the meal. Carbon Pesach is basically, we're showing we don't need to eat it. We're full. We're just having a little ritual eating for the sake of the mitzvah, but not that our main meal is the carbon Pesach. And so too, the achilas matzah at the end is evocative, a remembrance of that carbon Pesach, that should be the last taste you have in the mouth, the last food you have for the evening. Back in the day was avikomen, literally means dessert. So the carbon Pesach was your dessert. You should have tam Pesach befiv. The taste of the carbon Pesach should be the last thing that flavor remains with you the whole night. So too, we don't have a carbon Pesach. So nowadays we do substitute a kazayas of matzah instead of a kazayas of carbon Pesach. Okay, and then we're ready to bench. Everyone should have a cup of wine. It's the third of the 4 cups. Okay, bench. Bar Pragafen, even according to the Sardim after the benching, drink it reclining. And now we're opening the door after benching. What's the idea of opening the door? Because the Torah calls the night of the Seder Leil Shimurim, a guarded night. So it's a night of special divine protection. We're showing we're not afraid. We're opening the door because we have special divine protection on this night. And we recite these verses, Shvok HaMascha LaGoyim, pour out your wrath on the nations. And actually, at this point also, we pour the Koshel Eliyahu, Elijah's cup. Why do we pour it? Because now we're focusing on the future redemption. We're praying and hoping for the future redemption. So we said that's Eliyahu Hanavi. That's the 5th cup, the cup of Ve'evesi. God is the 5th expression of redemption. God is going to take us into the land, send us Eliyahu Hanavi before Mashiach, right? So that's where we're involved in right now. And we say these verses, pour out your wrath on the nations who have persecuted the Jewish people throughout the course of their long exile. Show that there is justice in the world, that there is a God who sees our suffering at the hands of the nations. Okay? Then we come back inside, we pour the 4th cup, and we recite the Hallel. Okay? The second half of Hallel, Lo Lanu, which should be sung nicely. Now, if there's 3 people, it doesn't have to be 3 men, it could be 3 whoever. One of the people should be the Chazan, like you do in Shul. The Chazan says Hodu, the people respond Hodu. Ana Hashem Mashiach, the people respond. The other 2 people respond, or if you have more, great. But the point is a minimum of 1 leader and 2 respondents. Okay, and then there's a difference between the Ashkenazic way to end it and the Sephardic way to end it. The Ashkenazic end, they say Yehalalucha, which is the end, almost the whole end blessing of the Hallel, but they do not say Baruch Atah Hashem Melech Mulo B'Tishbachos. They leave that part out. They say Nishmas, which is called in the Talmudic terminology Birkas Hashir, the blessing over. Actually, before Birkas Hashir, you say the Hodus. It's called the Halal Agadol. Those 26 Hodu Lashems, Hodus. And then you say Nishmas, which is Birkas Hashir, the blessing over the song. And then you say Yishtabach, and then Yishtabach, according to Nusach Hashem, at this point you do end with a blessing. Baruch Atah Hashem, Kel Melech Gol Batish Bachos, Kel Ados, etc. Baruch B'Sher Zimra, Melech Kel Chei Olamim. Then you make the Bar Priagofen according to the Ashkenazim, according to Sfardim, the Bar Priagofen from benching carries over. Make the Bar Priagofen, drink the wine reclining, and now we're up to Nirtza, which we ask God to Nirtza, that our Seder should be wanted and desired by God. We hope we did our divine service of the Seder in the proper way. And we end off L'Shana Haba B'Yushalayim, next year in the rebuilt Jerusalem. Now, why do we end off the Seder this way? There's actually 2 nights of the year where we end off L'Shana Haba B'Yushalayim. It's the Seder night, and after the Yom Kippur service, after Ne'ilah, we end off L'Shana Haba B'Yushalayim. Why specifically these 2 nights of the year? So the basic reason is because these are the 2 nights of the year where we most miss the rebuilt Jerusalem and the temple. Right? On Yom Kippur, the whole focus of the day when the Beis HaMikdash stood was the service, the avoda of the Kohen Gadol in the Beis HaMikdash. The one time a year he entered into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. The service in the temple on Yom Kippur was the focus. Now that that's destroyed, it's a whole different Yom Kippur. We still have Yom Kippur, but it's not the way it was when we had the Beis HaMikdash. So that's why after Yom Kippur we say L'Shana Haba B'Yushalayim. And so too on Pesach evening, right? We also feel a great lack because we don't have the Karban Pesach, we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. Back in the day, everyone would be Olel Regel. Everyone would come to Jerusalem. Okay, one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. Okay, and everyone would bring their own family's Karban Pesach, and they would sit and eat it together and singing together in Jerusalem. And the historians describe this. Josephus and others describe millions of hundreds of thousands of Jews together celebrating Pesach in Jerusalem with the Beis HaMikdash, with the Karban Pesach. It's a whole different experience. And therefore, because we're lacking that fullest experience, as beautiful as our Seder might be, we're lacking the full experience. That's why we say Dafka tonight, L'Shana Haba B'Yushalayim, that we next year, and hopefully this year, there's still a few days left to Pesach, maybe L'Shana Azos B'Yushalayim, may it be Hashem's will that He save us from our current difficult situation and bring us to Yerushalayim with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkeinu Meher B'Yameinu. Amen. Thank you so much for listening. Achad Kosher V'Sameach. We'll probably have a second installment, which is a separate insights into the Haggadah, which is really too much to put together with this just basic overview and the basic halachos of the Seder. Chad Kosher V'Sameach.